Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. Could Southern Cyprus ever join NATO? The Greek Cypriot leader thinks it might happen, but under the right conditions. The island's long-running dispute could soon become even more contentious if Nikos Christo-dou-lides' aspirations come true. But why the sudden turnabout after decades of a long-held policy in the south to keep the island mostly neutral during the Cold War? For decades, Cyprus has been divided along ethnic lines, with Turks in the north and Greeks in the south. While the Greek Cypriots are part of the European Union, they have remained outside NATO. However, the U.S. lifted its long-standing arms embargo on the island in 2022, a move that has deepened military ties between Southern Cyprus and Washington. During his meeting with Biden last month, Christo-dou-lides reportedly pushed for closer defense cooperation. Now, with the Greek Cypriot leader confirming his ambitions to join NATO, what far-reaching implications could that have for the island's stability and the broader Eastern Mediterranean? Is an old geopolitical flashpoint about to be reignited? For more, joining me now in studio is Dimitris Sarhouas. He's the Türkiye director at the Center for EU Studies at Virginia Tech. From Istanbul, Zuhal Mert Uzuner, a professor and director of the Marmara University Research Center of International Relations. And also from Istanbul, former U.S. Ambassador Matthew Bryza. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me now. Dimitris, I was planning on asking you, are the Greek Cypriots serious? But it looks like we just saw a statement coming from the head of Southern Cyprus administration, and they do seem serious. So a new question, why now? Why do the Greek Cypriots all of a sudden want NATO membership?
So thank you for having me, first of all. I think what is happening is that there is a new momentum now when it comes to the possibility of reigniting Cyprus talks. And we also had a very successful visit by the Cypriot president to Washington, where the issue of boosting the National Guard, its defense capabilities and its operational capabilities, its training and so on was aired. I think the Cypriot president today said the silent part loud, which was that he knows that Cyprus is not going to be gaining NATO accession anytime soon because he is aware of Türkiye's veto, which of course is going to be exercised in case such a membership prospect becomes more viable. But he knows also that he can use that potential as a bargaining tool of sorts, on the one hand to make sure that the defense capacities of the country become upgraded, and at the same time that maybe new momentum is instilled in the Cyprus talks that are meant to take place soon.
Okay. Matthew, a question to you. You know NATO very well. What does Cyprus have to offer to the transatlantic alliance? I mean, small island, middle of the Mediterranean. Does NATO actually want the Greek Cypriots to join?
Well, yeah, I mean, from NATO's perspective, sure, Cyprus is incredibly strategically located. I mean, it's 114 miles from Beirut, for example. And the United States has been cooperating with the Greek Cypriots in the past year on evacuations, for example, from Sudan. Way back in my day, when I had the U.S. government lead on the Cyprus negotiations, there was the evacuation of Lebanon, which happened via Cyprus, evacuation of U.S. citizens. And in terms of just from a naval perspective, its location is quite strategic. I remember the former chief of defense of the Turkish general staff explaining to me when I was a White House official from the Turkish perspective how strategic the island is where it's situated. Plus, for decades, the United Kingdom has had sovereign bases on the territory of Cyprus. And of course, both Greece and Turkey are NATO member states. Both are guarantor powers, along with the UK, of the Cyprus political situation. So even by simply derivatively, Cyprus matters to NATO. In terms of it also potentially becoming an aircraft carrier in the Eastern Mediterranean for NATO, that's theoretically possible. But as we were just saying, it's NATO membership for Cyprus is quite a long ways away, if it ever even happened.
Zuhal, both Dimitris and Matt said NATO membership is a long way away. I mean, we use the word red line, but I don't even think this qualifies as a red line. This is like a maroon line. I would probably say a veto will have never been used as decisively in the history of vetoes as Erdogan would plan on using it. What could sway the mind of the Turks to lift their veto? What would they be expecting?
When I first heard this idea, I thought exactly the same thing what you said, because existing Cyprus problem is in front of us, and this NATO membership is totally strange in this kind of atmosphere. So I think this is just a kind of a promotion of thinking again, revisiting the existing situation in the island, because we know that the Turkish position is very straight about two-state solution in the last years, and we have a progress in Greek-Turkish relations, and that was mainly depending on compartmentalization of the existing problems in Greek-Turkish relations. So in this compartmentalization, Cyprus issue was outside of this frame, and it was not satisfying for the Cypriot, Greek Cypriot leadership. So this initiative created again a kind of rise of the Cyprus issue into the agenda of discussions in our region. So I think this is just for bringing Cyprus issue into the agenda, and it is not something to discuss for a very short notice, let's say short-term resolution in the island.
Okay. Dimitris, I think the first thing that comes to mind, as Zuhal mentioned, two-state solution. Obviously, there's going to be other things that Türkiye is going to hand a very, very long roadmap, I assume. Nothing similar to what Sweden and Finland had to deal with. Could the Greek Cypriots meet these demands? Is that too much? I mean, what's the plan? I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around this because it seems like a lot is going to be asked, and during this whole process, the last 70 some odd years, whether it was reunification, two-state solution, there's been little to no progress. How are we going to see progress on NATO?
So I don't, as I tried to say before, Yusuf, I don't really think that progress on NATO membership as such and getting Cyprus into a membership track is really the objective of the Cypriot president. And by the way, I should mention that this policy in itself is not without its controversy in Cyprus itself, given the fact that, as you know, in the past the country prided itself of being an independent state, and he wanted to play a sort of third role during the Cold War. So that in itself, I think, is a reflection of how domestic politics in Cyprus itself has moved now, and the possibility of the country becoming a NATO member has arisen. Now, in terms of the Cyprus issue, which is a real issue here, and it's, of course, the precondition for any kind of membership talks in the future, we know that the positions of Turkey on the one hand and Cyprus on the other are very far away. We know that a two-state solution has been put forward formally by Turkey, and we also know that this is not going to be a starter for the Cypriot government or for the Greek government for that matter. Now, the notion of a bizonal, bi-communal sort of confederation of sorts, I think remains on the table. That's probably what the United Nations, through its good mediation efforts, is trying to achieve. And it's interesting to note that what the Greek PM noticed the other day was I think, an interesting development when he said that we will continue our dialogue with Turkey, given the differences that we have. And in some respects, it's good to talk just to talk, to make sure that the GNC remains a sea of peace and calm and tranquility for the time being. But he also mentioned that he sees some momentum on Cyprus talks. So I think this is probably where we need to focus a bit more and see whether the two communities can get any closer in comparison to where they were before.
Before I move on to Matt, I want to ask you one more question, because you talked about a divide domestically. I want them to hear it too, because this could be important and valuable insight. What is the feeling domestically inside of Southern Cyprus, and what's the divide?
Sure. So for a very long period of time, one of the biggest parties, if not the biggest party, was a communist party, AKEL. The AKEL party has always had an anti-NATO position because of its ideological predisposition. It used to be a very strong party, governing party. President Christofias came from AKEL, for instance. But the party's fortunes have declined in recent years. More centrist and more center-right political forces have come to rise in Cyprus over the last few years. And they are, of course, the pro-NATO sort of part of this equation. So in Cyprus, just like everywhere else in Europe, politics has been appended. We have had the rise of the far right. We have a far right, rather dangerous party in the country called Elam. We also have the collapse of the more traditional centrist parties. And so this NATO membership talk, it really comes in a way out of the blue, given that the old centrist consensus appears to be collapsing in that country as well as in so many others in Europe.
Okay. Matt, I want to ask you, when we look at this process, both Zual and Dimitris said that this is meant to breathe new impetus into the talks between Turkish and Greek Cypriots. Do you share that view? And is NATO membership kind of creating a carrot that Türkiye can give to the Greek Cypriots?
I'm so glad you asked this, Yusuf, because it's exactly what I wanted to talk about right now, picking up on what Dimitri said. I was in Cyprus, in Nicosia, last week for an economist conference, and on the margins of it, I had the chance to have conversations with all the party leaders, including the head of AKEL. President Christo-dou-lides addressed the conference, but I also spoke with the energy minister and the foreign minister, and all of them, even Nikos Papadopoulos, the son of Mr. No, the former president of Cyprus, Tassos Papadopoulos, all of them, for the first time in a long time that I've heard, were saying, we are committed to restarting the talks. We know we're going to have to make concessions. Yes, this is politically controversial. And even the head of AKEL, he was saying, let's find ways to work together on energy. And from my perspective, I think electricity is a good way to begin. Electricity sharing, connecting Turkey and the island, because natural gas is so politicized. But leave that detail aside. There is a new mood among the Greek Cypriots, at least their political leaders, of wanting to give a shot at reunifying the island into a bi-zonal, bi-communal federation. And I also spoke to the U.S. ambassador and the UK High Commissioner, and my impressions that I'm sharing now are not, how to put it, different from theirs. As far as putting NATO, then membership on the table, I think President Christo-dou-lides himself has said, we know this is not realistic now. They're not asking for membership. They're asking for extension of the period of the waiver on arms embargo to Cyprus, and asking for more NATO standard equipment so they can bring the National Guard into accordance with interoperability with NATO. But I think by putting this issue on the table, yes, it is mixing up and changing the political conventional wisdom among the Greek Cypriot community, looking for a way to have a new game, if you will, domestically, and then, of course, trying to rope in the United States and Washington, who for decades has hoped that eventually the island could be part of NATO, going back to your initial question to me. And so I think the hope is then that the United States can somehow, working with Turkey, open up a new attitudes for negotiations. My last comment is when I was handling the Cyprus brief, I was always treated there with considerable suspicion and, yes, a hostile attitude toward NATO. And last week it was completely different and positive reception.
Okay, so Zual, Matt's saying that a positive reception and a different outlook towards NATO in Southern Cyprus, and also some proactive attitude towards reopening talks with Turkish Cypriots. Now, it looks like if NATO membership is going to be a reality, and obviously the Turks are going to have a veto and probably provide some type of roadmap to lift their veto, it means Athens and Brussels will probably have to be on board. What type of role do you expect the EU and Greece to play in this process, Zual?
Most probably, Greece would like to have this idea of NATO membership of the Cyprus island. And we know that they are giving support for reopening a new page for negotiations for the solution of the Cyprus problem. So that was a kind of differentiation in the positive agenda discussions in between Turkey and Greece. But now, if that creates a kind of positive impact on this, the idea of opening up this, let's say, the negotiations in the island, so most probably Greece and the Brussels will be much, let's say, happy for having this new the negotiation initiative. But we have to underline one issue here. It is the Turkish experience in the EU membership process. I'm sure all of we remember what happened in EU integration process of the Greek Cypriot government. And that was a very important chance for resolution of the problem in the island together with the Turkish membership process. But what happened was very disappointing for Turkish perspective. And now NATO membership will remind again that process. So it won't be some automatic and contribute to this negotiation perspective. I'm not so sure about how it is positive impact for the resolution or the bringing sides to the table again. But what is important that Turkey will be very sensitive about NATO membership, and surely there will be a huge veto in front of existing governmental tendencies in Greek Cypriot side.
Well, very recently there was a European Political Community Summit, a very interesting photo at that summit. The Turkish president sitting with Emmanuel Macron from France, also the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis at that table, and also Christo-dou-lides at that table. So a very interesting quartet of leaders sitting there. You wouldn't expect to see Erdogan talking to the three of them, especially all together at that same time. You think NATO was mentioned there? And do you think that this whole NATO process could have also a positive impact on Turkish-Greek relations?
I'm not sure, Yusuf, that it was discussed. And I think that this particular quartet in Budapest was obviously taking place in the context of the European Political Community Summit meeting, but also in the context of the new incoming Trump administration and the sort of changes that this will bring. And I think this is the most important point here. I think the very notion that the Cypriot president is sitting next to President Erdogan of Türkiye and are having this coffee chat is suggestive of the fact that there is a possibility, quite a serious possibility, that the geopolitics in our broader region is now going to be under massive pressure, potentially under transformation. And I think wise leadership is about recognizing the signs early on and trying to stake yourself in a position through which you're not going to have to face any losses, but you will remain open to the possibility of negotiating a better deal. And I think that what is happening at the moment is certainly on the Greece-Türkiye sort of bilateral relationship, there is undoubtedly a willingness on both parts, because they both realize that they benefit from this, to continue talks in a way that will allow for relations to continue improving. I think they both recognize that there are certain limits over which they could probably hardly go. I don't know if you are familiar, but in the Greek political landscape, the issue of continued negotiations with Turkey for Prime Minister Mitsotakis is becoming a more expensive process. He had to kick out of the party the former prime minister, the former leader of the Nea Demokratia center-right party. So it's something which is quite costly, but I think Prime Minister Mitsotakis is committed to that agenda. And it's very possible that given the changes that we have in the broader region, this is something that he will continue investing in quite heavily.
Matthew, what type of role could the Americans play in this whole process? And I mean, lately, the Turks have been very provoked by the lifting of the embargo on the Greek Cypriots by the United States, and also increased military activity over there. So, I mean, when the Turks look at this, they could be thinking, well, this could just be cover for more U.S. military involvement in Greek Cypriot, in the southern part of the island. So what type of role could they play where it's proactive and it's not further irking the Turks?
Yeah, it's interesting that in my experience in government, there was always an assumption among the Greek Cypriots that the Turkish Cypriots were the darlings of Washington. Because if you're a Greek Cypriot, you think, you know, the world's against you, especially the United States. I mean, anything that's not the EU is against you. The U.S. doesn't need any further military presence on Cyprus. I mean, it's, you know, the UK has its sovereign bases. But what the U.S. would like is that the Cyprus problem be resolved. And of course, in the distant future, the U.S. would welcome the island entering NATO, just as from a legal perspective, the island has already entered the EU. It's just that the acquis communautaire is suspended in the north. But there's not going to be, it makes little sense to conceive of Cyprus joining NATO without a settlement of the Cyprus problem. So what can the U.S. do? Well, from the Greek Cypriot perspective, it can help bring along Ankara and help persuade Ankara to agree to move away from a position of supporting only a two-state solution and maybe supporting a resumption of the talks. Now, for us, those of us who follow U.S.-Turkey relations, Yusuf, so closely, there's so much tension in U.S.-Turkey relations, but look what's been happening on the fifth-generation fighter talks. Right now, there's more talk coming out of Washington and Ankara about Ankara maybe rejoining the F-35 project. We just got news that maybe the Turkish Defense Ministry won't buy those 79 modification and upgrade kits for F-16s as they have their eyes maybe on the F-35s. So there's something going on maybe on the security side in U.S.-Turkish relations that could also build good faith and build trust between Ankara and Washington. And then perhaps that could redound to persuading Ankara to take another look at the reunification talks on Cyprus, with the understanding that way down the road, perhaps the island could enter NATO. But again, after a two-state or after a settlement, I should say.
Zuhal, Matt says there could be room for compromise. A lot of these issues seem to be national security concerns, very strategic concerns for Türkiye. Is there flexibility on the policy where Türkiye can make compromises at the table, or are almost all of these red lines? How would a negotiation look if the other side is asking the Turkish president, well, we'd like you to compromise. What can you compromise on?
Here we have to remember the background of these negotiations and what were experienced in those processes. Why Turkey moved to this two-state solution position? First of all, there is a kind of let's say the feeling or an idea in the Turkish side that there won't be any solution and just waiting for the better time to eliminate all the demands of Turkish Cypriot side. That was the main reason, and that's why the hope for a federal resolution is a little bit weakened in the minds and hearts of Turkish decision makers. That's why this two-state solution proposal came to the table. It is about the idea that there is a need for an urgent solution for the people of the island. What is solutions? Because this creates a kind of instability for the peoples living, especially in northern Cyprus. So what is expected from Turkish side is actually reaching out as an acceptable solution for the both sides. So what is a concession here? So coming back to the table is possible from Turkish perspective, maybe, but it won't be exactly the same thing what was expected from the Turkish side in the previous negotiations. Maybe the positions will be a little bit different, but the returning back to the table for a common state construction will be very difficult. So what can be the hope for any kind of settlement in the island is maybe accepting existing de facto situation and finding some cooperation methods to overcome the problem. So the starting from this, the proposal of Hakan Fidan, maybe by starting from a common projects, especially about gas transformation or energy transit routes, can be a beginning point and can be a kind of a good start for further steps. But I don't expect a sudden U-turn to this, the federal state solution from Turkish government.
So Zuhal says no sudden U-turn towards reunification. Could there be a U-turn from the Greek Cypriots towards a two-state solution, or is that completely a red line?
I think that's completely a red line, Yusuf. There is a big consensus both in Nicosia and in Athens in case Greece gets to be asked that a two-state solution is simply unacceptable. The narrative, the discourse is one that says the Republic of Cyprus is an internationally recognized part of the island at the moment, and what needs to be done is to find a solution that will resemble something similar, maybe to Kran Montana in 2017, the Annan Plan of 2004. We know why these failed at the time. I think what they are trying to stake their hopes on is the idea that the United Nations will get re-energized, and now that there is a positive momentum in relations between Athens and Ankara, maybe this can travel all the way to Cyprus and lead to a serious resumption of talks between the two sides.
Matt, we're running out of time. One quick question, one quick answer. The timing of all this. Obviously, it's meant to be proactive, but it could also have a polarizing effect. You have war in Ukraine. You need NATO unity. Could this backfire and alienate the Turks even more from NATO at a time where the transatlantic alliance needs Ankara more than ever?
I hope not, because nothing's going to happen on Cyprus and NATO until there's a resolution of the Cyprus problem. And who knows what that might look like or when it might happen.
Okay. Zuhal, Matt, and Dimitris, thank you for joining me. That was a very good conversation looking in the future, what could happen with the Greek Cypriots and possible NATO accession. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.